Hi guys, it's Luton and LevelCap here, and today it's time for another episode of On the Level. We're going to be talking about the PlayStation 4, we're going to be talking about Battlefield and Battlefield 4, and what it means for everyone that's involved with that, whether you're playing on the PC, whether you're playing on the Xbox, or whether you're playing on the PS4. So Level, obviously the PlayStation 4 has kind of been revealed fairly well now. A lot of stats and sort of information kind of came bleeding out through the week about it. But what's one of the biggest changes that you think is going to make a real difference to Battlefield players when we get forward into Battlefield 4?
Well, I think a lot of people have been pretty excited about the fact that maybe the game will actually be able to support 64 players. That's something that's been very key to Battlefield since Battlefield 1942. You could even hack 1942 and play with 128 players if you're crazy enough. But that's just been so key to having these giant battlefields look like giant battlefields. And I've always felt so bad for the console guys being limited to those 24-player servers. It
Yeah.
just seems sort of like it's trying to be Battlefield, but you just need more players. And I know everybody in the consoles has had a different experience than I have had on the PC. And
Yeah.
I don't like that. I want to be able to talk to console players and talk about like these epic, huge battles that I've had on these maps here and there and not have these divergent gameplay experiences. So I think it's going to be a really good leap in terms of bringing PC and console experience with Battlefield specifically closer together. And I think that's going to be awesome.
I do think it will make a massive difference, and I have to say, with Endgame coming out next week, now it's going to be released earlier again for PlayStation 3 and premium players, so it'll be good for us to get a look at it first. But I talked about a little bit earlier this week about Endgame and sort of how I was thinking around it, and you know, this whole comparison about talking about PlayStation 4, how it's going to be able to support more players, and it's so important and so relevant. When you look at what Endgame is going to be like, I can't imagine how it's going to function really for us as console players. I can only see that it's going to be Armored Kill all over again. You have these huge expansive maps. I can't see that it's going to play out well. When you think about previous Battlefields that were on console like Bad Company, the gameplay and the whole map dynamic was tailored in an entirely different way, and because when we've come up to Battlefield 3, it's been designed in, again, a completely sort of sideways move compared to Bad Company 2. It's gone bigger, there's been all these sort of things improved, and it's obviously been built with PC players in mind because of having these larger player counts, larger maps, which, let's face it, is much better. It's going to be a much more exciting, more dynamic environment where players have a lot more choices, much more tactical options, and generally a huger, like just a grander experience.
Yeah, all those videos you see on YouTube of somebody sneaking around on Metro and coming up behind like 8 guys with their backs turned.
Yes.
That's on PC because
Yes.
that's where you find clumps of 8 guys with their backs turned.
Yeah.
And on console, it's like, well, that would be 2/3 of their team right there. It's very unlikely you're going to find them all like in one area.
Well, the
So
larger maps as well, the more widespread maps, like your Armored Kill maps and things. And I said to Rival X Factor this week about that when we were talking, and we were saying like how on some of these larger maps like Bandar Desert and stuff, when you're playing Conquest on console. Now, I know some console players have said to me before, oh no, Luton, it's not like that. You have really good map. Sorry, okay, I have yet to be on an Armored Kill map where I have not been able to get on a quad and cap 3 bases without seeing another player. Seriously.
all right, so looking back at the consoles, then we have these PlayStation 4 controllers. They look pretty slick, they look a little more curvy than the last ones. But the big difference is that they have these interesting touchscreens built into the front of them. Now, we don't know if the next gen Xbox is going to have touchscreen or not. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of cool new technology built into the controllers. But there's potential for some new stuff to be integrated to all games, but Battlefield included with the touchscreen device. So, I mean, what if you could do stuff like select your loadout or switch your squad perk or something like that from the controller? I mean, again, we don't know exactly if the controller is going to be there for the Xbox version, so we're not sure how much time DICE might want to spend creating a different experience on one console from the other.
Yeah.
but it could actually involve a lot of cool new stuff.
It could improve things like the UI. It could be improved for little pieces of tech in the game in terms of sort of weapon controls or perhaps vehicle control things and stuff. I mean, for example, turrets and stuff on vehicles always can be a little bit of a tricky, sluggish deal on a console. Perhaps it would give them some more movement there. But I think, like you said, I think the biggest problem is going to be making that kind of element function across multiple systems and making sure that it's fair and sort of balanced for everyone. I mean, it would be a lot of expectation to sort of develop just for one system a whole, function there in terms of that. But I think it's going to give some option, but they haven't really shown it, and I think that's the thing. We need to kind of get some kind of understanding. I mean, could it be that you sort of, how would it always be live? Would you have to activate it in game? So would you sort of be holding your controller, double tap it to kind of activate it so that you go into it to use it, or would it be something that's kind of constantly passively on there?
Yeah, like what we don't even know if it has high level animation capabilities.
How
like
sensitive
maybe
is it going to be?
Yeah, it might only show like 8 frames per second or be limited to a very low range of colors. There is a lot we don't know, and they do have to try and keep the cost of the controllers down. You know, it can't be like an iPhone in every console controller. It'd be kind of crazy.
But I think it shows that this kind of development is constantly ongoing. There's sort of technology, everything's kind of floating around at the moment. Obviously, 720 has not been revealed even. They haven't sort of spoken about it. We don't know what's going to go on there. So I think there's a lot of things to kind of take into consideration there. And the other thing is, there's been a lot of talk about the PlayStation 3 and how the beta is going to run on the PlayStation 3. They came out and said this week, didn't they, that the Battlefield 4 is going to be on the next-gen consoles. They've sort of basically said that this week. But, I mean, what do we think in terms of this? I mean, when people have spoken about the beta being on PlayStation 3 and the fact that Battlefield 4 will have to release onto the PlayStation 3, I mean, I understand the rationale behind that. I understand that what they're saying is that not enough people will have a new console in terms of buying the new game, so therefore they'll have to release it across both systems in order to make some money back there. But with all this talk of Battlefield 4 being so far advanced, I just can't see how they're going to be able, and with extra player counts, etc. I mean, are they going to develop a wholly dumbed down game? I understand the argument, but I just don't get it.
The Frostbite engine, the Frostbite 2 engine has already pushed the PlayStation and Xbox hardware to its max. The current generation consoles, they're limited to such a low player count because they literally just don't have the hardware to handle more. And they're limited to 30 frames per second. So now you're going to come out with an engine that's even more advanced and put that on the exact same hardware. I mean, what are you going to do? Limit the player base even more?
Yeah.
Or you're really going to have to just sacrifice a huge amount on textures and other things in the game and dumb down the physics or whatever. I feel bad for people who are going to play Battlefield 4 on the current generation consoles, because I can only imagine it's going to be a somewhat gimped version of what they want it to be, and I understand financially it makes sense to release on the old ones, but it's going to be such a sweet experience on the new gen consoles compared to the old ones, and it's just going to be a sad state for those people buying the old gen console, be it 4.
So do you feel pretty sure that it's going to release on both? In my mind, I just find it questionable, this idea that it's going to be so dumbed down to be put onto the PS3 or whatever. It would have to be so significantly reduced, so you think it would definitely have to be released on both?
I think the only state in which they wouldn't release it on the old version is if Sony or Microsoft paid them to make it exclusive, or you could make it an exclusive title, or maybe just paid them not to release it on the old ones to try and promote the new hardware, try and get the new hardware going. I'm sure they would probably have a few deals with some of those companies, like they would get better featuring on their in-game stores or whatever, or some advertising from them or something like that, not to release it on the old consoles. But otherwise, I think financially it just makes too much sense to put it on the old consoles.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and when it comes to the beta as well, now they're going to have to do a fair amount of testing, as they would. Hopefully, they're going to do some quite constructive testing. And I also hope that when we go forward into Battlefield 4, that this will continue rather than having these huge dump patches. I hope that they will sort of listen to people's, sort of commentary and listen to and implement sort of small patches as they go along. But when it comes to the beta, I mean, it's going to have to be on current systems. So, I mean, how are we going to look at it in those terms from what they're going to try and get out of it? I would imagine they will have to be focusing more on the mechanics and the sort of general UI dynamic, the sort of the bare bones of the title itself, rather than the kind of gloss finish, as it were. I mean, is that how you imagine it will be, that they're going to focus on these sort of more component elements rather than a more advanced version? Because, again, I can't see how they're going to do it any other way.
Yeah, that's going to be really confusing. I mean, the PC side is an entirely different scenario. We
Yes.
all have computers, we'll beta test it, we'll get good feedback. But for consoles, it seems like, yeah, they're probably going to have to just balance the actual, weapon balance, map balance, that kind of thing on the old gen consoles. And then they're just going to have to do a ton of internal testing on next gen consoles for bugs and all that kind of thing. Luckily, consoles are a little bit easier to troubleshoot for bugs and stuff like that than PC,
Mm.
because you only have one type of hardware that you're making the game for.
Unless, of course, the beta doesn't release on console.
Well, and they keep talking about their next gen software. Now, I think we've talked about before that we thought that the next generation Battlefield game would just be sort of a refined Frostbite 2 engine,
Yeah.
something that has less bugs, that's a little bit more friendly for hardware and stuff out there, just less glitchy in
Yeah.
general. And they haven't confirmed that they've ditched the Frostbite engine. I'm sure they haven't. I'm sure they've just upgraded it. But they keep talking about in some of these little posts here and some of the tweets and whatnot that it's got next gen software, and that people that have seen it have just said it's nothing short of astonishing. Now,
Mm.
Battlefield 3 already looks pretty damn impressive. There's very few games out there that can actually compete with the graphics quality of BF3. So if they've taken it even further, it'll be interesting to see what happens both on previous gen consoles, but also if are we going to have a whole new variety of bugs to have to deal with? Hopefully not.
I mean, that's the thing, is we've always talked about up until now the fact that Battlefield 3, and a lot of people have said this, not just us, that the Battlefield 3 was kind of a test almost. It was a very long beta, and that and that would sort of lead towards why these DLCs have been so different throughout, and why they've made so many widespread changes as the game has gone along. And so we always assumed that Frostbite 2 came out with Battlefield 3, so we always assumed that, yeah, it would just take that system, go on and upgrade it a bit, improve it a bit, because that's what, the follow-up games tend to do, and with good reason, because you don't want to change everything every single time you want to do it. So we thought that it would be a very strong improvement, but not drastically different. But from what we hear, it sounds like they have really made some huge changes to the games, perhaps just in terms of graphics, but perhaps totally in terms of mechanic as well, and with player counts increased for console. So it'd be really interesting to see. I mean, another thing to bear in mind when we're talking about upgrading and moving forward is the fact that the PlayStation 4's internal architecture has been changed so much, and as we talked about and Sony talked about, the fact that the system that they've made for the PS3, they basically made it very difficult for developers, because they tried to kind of safeguard a lot of their technology. It made it very, very difficult for developers to work with. And so they've gone in the other direction. They've gone much more to try and make a kind of a more sort of PC-esque build.
Yeah, it's very similar to the Xbox approach.
Exactly.
The Xbox you can disassemble and be like, well, it's this CPU, it's this GPU.
Yeah.
Here's this, it's using this kind of motherboard. Like, it's pretty much a computer. That's what
Yeah.
the PlayStation 4 is going to be.
Yeah.
It's not going to have all this weird proprietary cell processor stuff going
Yeah.
on.
And so hopefully it's going to make it more user friendly, not just for obviously DICE, but for all developers, and that's the kind of philosophy that they've been going towards. But when we think of that in terms of Battlefield, well, hopefully it means that we're going to have less bugs, because often people say, well, it's the consoles that are causing the bugs because they have to be done separately and it's causing all this confusion and blah blah blah. So perhaps we'll see less of that, and things are going to be more sort of stable across the board, and I think everyone would agree that that's not a bad thing. But we really have to see how it pans out. In my mind, there are so many unanswered questions, and it's all kind of rumour speculation at the moment. There's all this stuff flying around, and I don't know, we're just going to have to see what happens, really.
Yeah, I think we can say without a doubt, though, that Battlefield 4 is definitely generating a huge amount of hype. I can't wait to see the first sneak peek of the game. People have been saying it's astonishing. I think Battlefield 3 is pretty astonishing to look at. The trailers are pretty mesmerizing, so taking it beyond that is something that I'm really looking forward to see. Can't wait to see how it runs on the new computers. Hopefully we get a little bit more bug support from the devs, a little bit more balance support. maybe a little bit more open feedback back and forth, perhaps an update for Battle Log. But, those are all things we've talked about before.
Alright guys, so today we're talking about Battlefield 4, PlayStation 4, next-gen consoles, all of these things. Obviously there is so much discussion, so much rumour and speculation going on, but we'd be interested still to hear what you guys have got to say on this. What do you think? Do you think that it's really going to bring everyone back up to a more level playing field? I think that whatever happens, it's going to be a very exciting year. There's so much going on, so much to come out. Thanks for watching today guys, we'll see you next time for another episode of On The Level.